A young black girl walks into a bustling store, her eyes scanning the shelves with purpose. Moments later, a stern police officer enters, his gaze locking onto her. Without hesitation, he accuses her of shoplifting, his voice sharp and his assumptions clear. The girl protests, but her words seem to fall on deaf ears as he insists on taking her into custody. What the officer doesn't know is that the truth he's about to uncover will completely shatter his assumptions. As the girl's father steps into the scene, the atmosphere shifts, revealing a twist that no one saw coming. In this story of bias, assumptions, and unexpected revelations, we'll explore how a moment of prejudice leads to an eye-opening reality. Stay tuned to see how justice, accountability, and an unexpected lesson unfold. The officer tightens his grip on the girl's arm, ignoring her pleas and the growing stares from nearby shoppers. He insists she empty her pockets, determined to catch her in the act. Her voice trembles as she tries to explain, but his mind seems made up. "You're not walking out of here without facing the consequences," he snaps, his tone cold and dismissive. Meanwhile, the girl's father, dressed in a sharp business suit, is making his way to the front of the store. He's been running late after a meeting and had no idea his daughter arrived ahead of him. As he steps closer, he notices the commotion and freezes. Seeing his daughter in tears and the officer's stern expression, he quickly puts the pieces together. But instead of rushing forward, he watches for a moment, his face unreadable. There is something in his eyes, calm yet calculating as he approaches. The father finally steps forward, his calm demeanor contrasting with the chaos unfolding. "What's going on here?" he asks, his voice firm but measured. The officer barely glances at him, brushing him off with a curt reply. "This girl was caught shoplifting. She's coming with me." The father's gaze shifts to his daughter, her face streaked with tears, then back to the officer. "Caught shoplifting, you say? Did anyone see her take something?" His words are sharp, and his tone demands attention. The officer hesitates for a moment before doubling down. "She was acting suspicious. I don't need to explain myself." Shoppers whisper among themselves, sensing the tension. Some pull out their phones, quietly recording. The store manager appears, confused and nervous. "Is there a problem?" he asks, glancing between the officer and the father. The father doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he looks around the store, a hint of recognition in his eyes. "Oh, there's a problem. All right," he says, his voice steady but laced with something deeper. "But I think it's not the one you think it is." The officer narrows his eyes, clearly unimpressed, unaware he's standing on the edge of a much bigger revelation. The officer crosses his arms, glaring at the father. "If you've got something to say it. Otherwise, I'll do my job and take her in." His words slice through the growing murmurs in the store, but the father doesn't flinch. Instead, he steps closer, his presence commanding. "Your job," the father says, his tone calm but cutting. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass and humiliate. Did you even stop to think before accusing her?" The officer's face reddens, but he refuses to back down. "She was acting suspicious," he repeats, his voice rising. "If you've got an issue, take it up with the court." Before the father can respond, the store manager interjects, his voice shaky. "Wait, sir, who are you?" The father turns to him, pausing for a moment before speaking. "I'm the owner of this store." Gasps ripple through the crowd. The officer's expression falters for the first time, disbelief flashing across his face. "Owner?" he repeats, his voice uncertain. The officer stammers, his authority completely dismantled. Before he can respond, the father steps forward. "This could have ended with you humiliating my daughter, but now the world sees the truth. Your bias, your actions, they speak louder than any excuses. As the officer is escorted out, the father kneels beside his daughter, his voice softening. "Are you okay?" She nods, her tears replaced by a quiet strength. Together, they walk toward the exit, leaving behind a lesson no one in the room will forget. As the father and daughter stepped outside, the cool air felt like a release from the tension that had filled the store. She looked up at him, her voice small but steady. "I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" He knelt down, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." Sometimes people make judgments that have nothing to do with who you are. Inside, the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs filled with reflection and unease. The store manager, shaken by what had unfolded, vowed to review the incident and implement changes to ensure fairness in the future. As they walked away, the father held his daughter's hand tightly, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. He knew this moment would stay with her, but he also hoped it would teach everyone watching the importance of seeing beyond assumptions. Some lessons, after all, are unforgettable. "Yes, the owner," the father replies, his voice growing firmer. "And I suggest you think very carefully about your next move, officer." The tension in the room is thick, every pair of eyes locked on the unfolding confrontation, waiting to see what will happen next. The officer's face tightens, his authority now visibly shaken. "Owner or not, the law is the law," he says, trying to regain control. "If she hasn't done anything wrong, why was she acting suspicious? Why wouldn't she explain herself?" The father takes a deep breath, glancing at his daughter. Her eyes, wide with fear and frustration, meet his. "She doesn't have to explain herself to you," he replies firmly. "She's here because I asked her to pick something up for me." The officer opens his mouth to argue, but the father raises a hand, cutting him off. "And since you're so concerned about suspicious behavior, let me ask you something. Did you even check the security cameras before deciding she was guilty?" The store manager stiffens, his eyes darting toward the ceiling where the cameras are mounted. The officer hesitates, clearly caught off guard. I didn't need to." "She didn't need to." The father interrupts, his voice rising for the first time. "You were ready to drag a child out of here in handcuffs without a shred of evidence." Before the officer can respond, a store employee rushes forward, holding a tablet linked to the security system. "Sir, you'll want to see this," she says nervously, addressing the manager. The father steps back, folding his arms as the footage plays. The crowd leans in, holding their breath. What they see next sends a ripple of shock through the room. And suddenly, the officer isn't the only one under scrutiny. The room falls silent as the footage plays. On the screen, the young girl is seen walking calmly through the aisles, picking up a small item, a gift bag, and heading toward the counter. There's no sign of theft, no suspicious behavior, just a normal shopping trip. The whispers among the crowd grow louder, and the officer's face pales. "Looks like she wasn't stealing anything," the store manager says, his voice edged with unease. He glances at the officer, whose confidence has completely crumbled. "You've made a serious mistake." The officer stumbles over his words. I was just doing my job." Sheila Plake. "Like what?" The father cuts in sharply. "Like someone who doesn't belong here? Someone who fits your idea of a criminal?" His voice is steady, but his words hit like thunder, leaving the officer visibly shaken. Just as the tension seems to peak, the store employee hesitates, her eyes darting nervously toward the father. "There's one more thing," she says, tapping the screen. The footage rewinds to earlier in the day, showing the officer himself lingering in the same aisle. His hand subtly slides into his pocket, and moments later, he leaves the store without paying for an item. Gasps echo as all eyes turn to the officer. Care to explain that? The father asks, his tone calm but piercing.